Yeah, I think the discussion, part of the discussion has been trying to define social protocols, but very much the idea that we've clearly, Stephen's been very much pushing us towards distinguishing the two layers, one which is describing the knowledge / belief claim network, and the other is the whole curation, vote, opinion, aggregation, and I don't know if the social protocol is partly that layer and partly the layer above that, which is procedures, right? Methodology and procedures, like of which the aggregation and vote is one component. But how do we onboard people on these more structured, more structured conversations? And how do we, and all the questions around how do we deal with trolling? How do we deal with bad faith arguments? How do we deal with, or simpler things such as curation, evolution? I think these are all concerns which are shared for the whole system, but I think this is about addressing more the upper layers of that stack.
I think we've often talked about scoring, and I think social protocols goes beyond scoring in that it considers feedback loops.
Maybe as a little bit of context, so how it came about was that Felix and I were working on basically really describing Hacker News very well. So we wanted to know exactly what's going on with Hacker News and identify problems in it. We called it voting protocols. That's where this protocols notion came from for us. And we think we identified a feedback loop in the Hacker News formula, basically, that causes some problems. Although it works really well, there are some problems. For example, good or high quality or highly relevant content is overlooked because the news page is going so quickly. And yeah, the process of describing this whole process, or this whole Hacker News process, was really fruitful. So we identified that this is something that you could also do for social software in general, because you always have to give users options to interact with each other, be that giving likes to a post or sharing a post. Every option creates a certain obligation to do something with the data, and how to create protocols that do that in a way that doesn't incentivize the wrong things. That's basically the goal of it.
Some questions I'm personally asking myself on that issue is, we want to find this balance between favoring exploration and favoring, a kind of diversity of viewpoint, or that's something I want to achieve. But on the other hand, is that giving too much noise to fringe, too much bandwidth to fringe opinions? And what's the right balance there, and how to determine the right balance? And fringe opinion, including deliberate disinformation and deliberate fire hose of lies attacks against the epistemic system. That's one big problem for me. Encourage diversity without allowing spamming, without encouraging spamming. And I've been thinking about algorithms for favoring synthesis posts, like posts that say, well, here is an attempt to balance this and that, and syntheses that are accepted as valid by proponents of the original positions. But then, questions about could someone fake being a proponent of the position to sabotage it, and things like that. And again, I believe in this basic intuition of favoring synthesis, but on the other hand, does that mean that we'll have the synthesis posts that are very, cover a lot of ground? And then if you want to encourage diversity beyond that, then you immediately jump to the fringe, and again, making the fringe more visible. So that's one concern I'm working on. There's the whole question of trust and reputation, right? I'd like to favor people who have who check their claims with reality. How do I do that? Because it's a concern.
I think one way to narrow the scope of what we're talking about is to think about what perhaps a online open fact-checking system might look like. I think a lot of people's initial impressions are, well, that's just a terrible idea. Fact-checking is something people are interested in doing because of all this misinformation that's circulating online, because people believe all these falsehoods. So, but if you crowdsource fact-checking, you're asking these very people who are ignorant what they think is true. And what you have is just an opinion poll. And is there a way to actually do something that's better than an opinion poll? And I think there is, actually, with the right protocols.
Absolutely true, absolutely agreed. And yet the problem is, if we don't involve other people in the fact checking, then it's like, oh, this is a, elitist, biased system. And I think people need to see their opinion tabulated. And if the opinion is otherwise eliminated, it needs to be in a way that really shows why. And okay, this is the reason that we disagree with your contribution, and we choose to set it aside, or downvote it.
I think it's possible that something like a decentralized, like a crowdsourced fact-checking system doesn't necessarily need to produce one answer. It can produce data that is useful to each individual. For example, it could produce for each individual a number relative to their own social network. People in your social network think that these are good reasons to believe or disbelieve that. And the people in your social network, my paper on distributed Bayesian reasoning, I use the term justified opinion. It says the justified opinion of people in your social network is this, or the justified opinion of people in this forum is this, but there's not one global answer.
And the problem there is the risk of encouraging bubbles, and how do you relate that to something more global? So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of problems, and that's the whole reality angle. But I think there's the other angle, which is much simpler than that. There's tons of diverse possibilities, and we'll have to have some way to choose what to show people. And there's this balance between diversity and depth. And that may be up to a point. It should be a mode of the system, right? I'm really looking around. I'm really trying to understand more. That's fine. But when looking around, there'll be some ordering, and no ordering is value-free. And it's about discussing the pros and cons and the consequences of different orderings, because I don't think we need to settle on one ordering. There, I agree with Jonathan. There may be multiple metrics, but understanding the metrics, I think, is what we're trying to do in this forum, and their pros and cons.
I think a good way of thinking about it is maybe what do you want to encourage users to do, and then set an incentive for that, because some things already work quite well. I would say Karma or the performance metrics on Stack Overflow and so on. I mean, they're not perfect, but they kind of encourage the right behavior, although there are some aspects of it which are not good, but in general, it's a good resource. So
I'm a bit weary of taking Stack Overflow as a basis, not because it's not good.
I'm not saying it should be the basis.
No, but even as an example, because the karma is an ambiguous, right? You've provided a useful answer, and the notion of useful answer is not debated. The answer is or isn't useful to someone, period. There are very interesting metrics of usefulness, like we've mentioned a few times, the Change My Mind site, which is this has helped someone see something in a new perspective and giving points for that. And that's brilliant. I keep saying, let's encourage basically the effort of making the bridges between viewpoints, and that should be an incentive. But in a disputed environment, there's no clear marker of karma. And so we cannot use that beyond the point.
Yeah, I mean, but what is actually what we want to encourage?
And that is a perfectly good first question. As I said, one of my aims is encouraging people who make the bridges between viewpoints.
I think that's a really cool idea, like this change my mind thing, because like as a spontaneous reaction to that, I would say the opinions that I've changed are usually the more grounded ones that I hold now, because it's kind of difficult to change an opinion. So you have to go against a lot of internal biases and so on. So it's usually an opinion that is much more justified and more informed, probably. Yeah. I like that a lot. I think that's an interesting idea.
And this is kind of a side on that, but do people know that subreddit of the Change My View, someone tried to make a platform out of that, and it was very short-lived. Like the person tried to scale it like very heavily, and I think it lasted about a year maybe, and then they were like, okay, this is too expensive.
Too expensive? How? I mean, I'm curious because
expensive and hosting costs is where I think I found. They're like, they prepared for very high traffic, and something about their design, I guess, was out of their budget.
Okay.
It sounds like a disastrous implementation, basically. I wouldn't take that as a guideline for danger.
Oh, I didn't mean it as like any sort of guideline. If we're talking about the Change My View and like that is, some sort of, it's an interesting idea. Like I just want people to be aware that there had been a project on it. I've tried to find, I can see if I can find in my history, but like I tried to find sort of like post-mortem of their experience, but I do think a lot of it had to do with like more technical implementation. Now, I'm not saying that the fact that it's gone means that it's a bad idea.
And business model, maybe.
It's also, I mean, one risk. Sorry, go ahead.
I just like to kind of reiterate the point that Marc-Antoine was making, which is that I've been really hard pressed to find any good analogies for current moderating solutions out there for what we're trying to do, mainly because this is the first time I've thought of a system where the main aspect of it is adversarial, right? Exactly. It's like, imagine Stack Overflow, except that the answer that gets to the top gives one group money. Right, if you could do it that way, and it's not necessarily the submitter. It's not, in Stack Overflow you get reputation score, and you can use it as a resume. That's a different thing. But it's just that there's such high stakes in the debate site that it kind of, and also there's high stakes on both sides. There's high stakes for the people who are voting or giving an up vote or down vote. That's one side. There's high stakes for the outcome of this. So what is the cost for like Hacker News or something if an article that is really good doesn't make it to the front page? Nothing, right? They lose nothing. The creator of the article is pissed, but the thing just goes on. But it's a disaster if the canonical debate or whatever is highlighting really crazy ideas. And so then there's the side of content submission and reputation. I see definitely the importance of reputational score there in terms of ensuring good quality, right? Submission. So there's a definition for, one thing we want is to ensure good quality, and we have to define what is good quality, right? But the other thing there's other kinds of scoring or moderation to be considered in lots of different aspects. I guess each one needs to be taken separately. So maybe we just focus on the good quality submission as a first goal, right?
Yeah, there's so many, and depending on, for example, I've been thinking a lot about decision support systems, even in popularity contests. Like I often go to film festival and they ask me, do you want to submit this film you just saw as the best film? And it's like, it's ridiculous. I should be able to rank all the films I've seen in the festival, but my vote should not go against films I haven't seen, right? It's so they should only take into account ordering among the films I've seen. And that's about the uninformed thing that Jonathan is talking about, like polling uninformed opinion should be useless. I've often thought in a decision support system, I would never let people vote against a proposal directly. Though it's known that voting against works better than voting for. Like if people have, for example, a limited point system and allocate points to different decisions, the allocating lemons yields better quality than allocating stars, for example. There's research I could point to on that. But I would say, on the other hand, I would like to know why not? Like let people not vote against a proposal, but vote for a counter argument. And not consider a vote that is not buttressed by a counter argument, and even say, yeah.
So I just 2 thumbs up on that. I think that alone, it's the single feature that you could add to a lot of websites, and very much change the dynamics and the feedback loops in those sites. Just imagine, for example, Stack Overflow. Sorry to interrupt, Marc-Antoine. I don't know if you wanted to continue. Go ahead. So I have a post on Stack Overflow, an answer that got a lot of upvotes. And then one day, and there's this dumb little thing about JSON format. And then one day somebody commented and said, this is, not actually a very good answer, and here's why. And I looked at that comment and I thought, oh, damn, that's absolutely right. This was a bad answer. It's going to create more, do more harm than good if people do what I suggest. Eventually, I edited my comment when I realized what was going on, after gaining a lot of points and a lot of reputation, and probably doing a fair amount of harm to poor programmers that it did what I recommended. And I realized, well, what if the person who commented, if people could upvote his comment, that comment was seen as a reason that my answer shouldn't be the best answer, and people could upvote that comment, and the system said, aha, okay, let's do a little analysis. We can realize that people that are viewing that comment are likely to upvote it, and therefore not upvote my answer. These people are more informed because they've engaged in this discussion. At least they've seen the reasons that have been given. And the system should be able to calculate that my answer shouldn't be the best answer, despite all the upvotes it got in the past, because people that are seeing this comment no longer believe it's the best answer. And then, of course, I should not have all that reputation. My reputation should be based on posting things that stand up to scrutiny, and not posting things that are popular based on initial impressions.
Though you should get another kind of point for being able to see that the comment was relevant and changing your mind about this, and that is also worth something.
And issuing the correction. And said, so Johanna's answer question is, what do we want to encourage people to do? That's what we want to encourage people to do.
But it depends, Jonathan, because I mean, you're now inclining that the upvote on Stack Overflow is something different than it is. I mean, it is fully undefined. What it means is, oh, you try to help out, and it just so happened to be that, I mean, you had best intentions. People believed it was useful. You believed it was useful. So in that sense, you still contributed, and that gives you reputation on Stack Overflow. It's not like the upvotes on Stack Overflow mean how much truth you have spread in the world. That's not what it's about. It's just like a very
community engagement,
perhaps there. But
yeah, I have a well, finish your thought. Then I have some comments on what you said. Yeah.
Once you can identify a claim, so best answer, just useful. It's not a claim. But when somebody claims this is misleading, or makes a comment that says, or even makes the claim this is not a, this does this certain amount of harm. Now you actually have something you can disagree or agree with. And I think then it's a different type of scoring.
So yeah, in terms of the Stack Overflow one, it seems like there'd be a solution related to time, right? At some point, it's recognized that's not the good answer, and so more recent votes count higher than older votes. But that's that specific situation. Applying to canonical debate, we don't want to base reputation on quality in the sense of outcome. That's another difference that's very interesting, is we don't want to score people based on, did they provide the winning argument? Why is that? Because first of all, the system does not choose winners. So that's already kind of antithetical to what we're trying to do with the canonical debate. There's no winners. So what makes a submission high quality? Oh, and the other thing is there's no owners, at least from the reader's perspective of claims. We do need to track behavior of the people submitting. But the important thing here is a good contributor could be somebody who seeks out all sides of the story. And maybe is even trying to include straw man arguments that nobody makes for the sake of having them be defeated in public. So in terms of quality of a submission, it's not based on, is that the truth or is that the winning argument? It's more around, are you helping us map out the thought space and the information space around this topic, right? So it would have to be focused elsewhere. And so just to provide one counterexample, the kind of thing we'd want to stop is spam submissions, right? So we'd have to define what spam is.
Yep.
When I get that.
And this shows to me why, sorry, Jonathan, shows to me why we need two or more than one type of scoring. I think what you're speaking about is a kind of clarity scoring, and God, that's important in helping people, especially in the view of progressive formalization, helping to favor people who do the right work of making the thing clearer and more well-defined and show how it contrasts with something else or where it doesn't, and yada, yada, yada. And that's hugely useful versus knowing what the shit you're talking about, which is also important, which is maybe outside of your concern, but I think I'm pointing out it's a different concern. And I totally approve everything you said. It's just, we need both.
Analogy might be in a jury trial. You have different roles for the jury and the attorneys. And what makes a good attorney, a competent attorney, is the ability to make arguments for their side. Convincing arguments, thorough arguments. And what makes a good jury is to be able to balance and make a judgment. And I think those could be maybe are the two dimensions of scoring that we were just talking about. And another thing I have to say is in terms of, Tim, you say choosing winners is not something, is antithetical to canonical debate. And yet if you score something in any way and score one thing higher than another, then you have, in a sense, a sort of winner. And I certainly see in the context of a social site, the need for sorting, the need for a system that gives truth the advantage, that gives a well-reasoned opinions the advantage. And that doesn't mean that the system has to declare winners on every question. But we do want something where if somebody posts a rumor, or a bad answer in Stack Overflow, somebody else gives a reason. And the people that have considered that reason unanimously also agree that that answer was bad or that post is misleading. There should be a consequence. Those should not be amplified and promoted by the social network, or if you do show a score, those should have a smaller score. And I think that is important.
So so here we're talking about there needs to be different kinds of scores, right? So one is like the reputation score of someone making submissions. And the importance of that is mainly preventing spam and encouraging useful submissions, right? And that's not picking a winner. That's some other way we need to evaluate that. And it may just be, you know, the lemon sort of thing where if their submissions all keep getting flagged as spam, then they have better. It may be only negative reputation as opposed to good, but we'd like to positively encourage as well. The other thing is, you're absolutely right about sorting and that sort of thing. And that's a long and deep discussion. Well, one of the answers to that is that there need to be different measures. We plan not having one scoring algorithm, but pluggable. But that is dodging the question because in the end, there needs to be a default presentation, and that default presentation is going to need to rank. And so that's in a nutshell I'm forgetting the word, but that's the main conflict we have is we don't want to introduce bias, but at some point we need a default sorting for, you know, and sorting is generally going to be on arguments in terms of what are the most relevant and impactful arguments at the top to give somebody a quick 30-second view, and the stuff that is just kind of incidental and less important down towards the bottom. We want to do that, and we need scoring to do that, and we need to have to balance out all these elements in order to do that.
An argument is based on a claim, and if that claim is has a low score, then the argument would inherit a low score. I think no matter what sort of scoring system you use, an argument whose premises are false or rejected is not a strong argument. But you talk about.
Can I maybe on that note introduce a crazy idea, a little bit of a crazy idea, because I think we are talking about scoring in general, and there's an inherent problem with scoring always, which is Goodhart's law. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It basically states a Goodhart's law. It states that once a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good metric. So whenever you create a metric, then people optimize on that metric, and the metric is not a good target or is not a good metric anymore. So I discussed that. I think it was with Felix, but I'm not sure. I discussed that with someone, and they had the idea that you change the metric in an unpredictable way. So you continuously change the metric in an unpredictable way to keep it functioning or working, which I don't know if it works, but it's just an idea that I would find interesting to hear.
That's the Google search algorithm approach, right? Keep it secret, mix it around every now and then. So
I mean, is there a way to make it deterministic, so not manipulable?
So there's a term for that in game theory that's called strategy proofness, and you can design a mechanism that is strategy proof. You'll see a lot of articles about that.
Interesting. I should read up on that. But I think changing metrics actually is a problem with transparency. And I think transparency has to be an attribute of the system. If you get upvoted, downvoted, you have to know why. For me, that's absolutely fundamental. For me, that's a primary goal, because I'm thinking of decision systems and deliberative democracy, and a deliberative democracy cannot have hidden variables. And a constantly changing metric is also that. But I think this is a good reason to have multiple metrics. If you have it's easy to game one metric. It's probably much harder to game a bunch of metrics which are giving each an aspect of the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
I just found a paper I'm going to post in related academic research by Franz Dietrich and Christian List called Strategy Proof Judgment Aggregation. That's an interesting idea.
Just a quick note on multiple metrics. I think it's not impossible to game that system with multiple metrics. It's just more unpredictable. If you think about Twitter, for example, there are a lot of different metrics, and they all go differently into the curation algorithm. And there's like a crystal ball science of how you optimize your Twitter account. So it's like strategy.
I would say like
game the system.
Actually, the strategy that I'm trying to take with this, knowing that absolutely people are going to try to game it, right? It's already obvious it's going to be adversarial and under attack. So, what is the strategy to reduce the attack vector? And one of the main strategies I'm working with here is reduce the incentive for that, right? What is a high incentive? Declaring a winner creates the high incentive, right? So if you're talking about, was the election stolen? It's a huge incentive if you're going to declare the winner. If instead we say, here's just all the information and you make up your mind, the incentive is gone. If we don't share any of the scores, if there's no scoring and it's just like, so there's the one idea is the personal score, which is I believe this, I believe that, I agree with this, I agree with that, and it just provides your own personal insight and you can share that. Then the stakes for cheating on that are basically zero. You're essentially cheating yourself out of seeing what you actually believe, right? So that's the extreme approach of that. But then that would get rid of important information about aggregate opinions, right? And in terms of what we're talking about, what is good quality information, that sort of thing is all lost if it's not shared, right? So, this is where we're just trying to reduce the stakes of these scoring algorithms by saying, okay, these are just people's opinions. This is a coherent viewpoint on this debate and that sort of thing. There would be aggregate, we probably have some sort of Bayesian approach, a scoring mechanism. We probably have a popular vote type thing, but the question is, how do we reduce bias there? Maybe we only show the popular vote after you've declared your vote, for example. Maybe by having different scoring algorithms, we say this isn't showing who's right. This is just one lens on looking at this, that it seems a lot of people seem to be leaning that way. I don't know. That's kind of the strategy we're trying to think of.
Bringing that back to the idea of a protocol. So you're talking about the incentives that the system creates, and that creates feedback loops and dynamics where certain types of behavior are rewarded. Certain types of content is amplified. Certain types of behavior is discouraged. And you're trying to create the dynamic that produces sort of the emergent properties of a healthy and intelligent debate. But I think looking at it as a protocol is important because every social platform, every online community is going to develop its own dynamics. In this community, you realize if you go to this site like Hacker News and you post a certain type of comment, it is likely to be upvoted or downvoted. And that dynamic, it is a function of the past, of the history of the website, of the people on that website and what they have learned to expect from each other, and all interacting with the features of the site and the ranking algorithm and the behavior of the moderators. So you got this very, very complex system, and you're trying to create this emergent healthy property. And it's a very complicated thing. But if you look at it as a form of a protocol, you can start to be really rigorous about, okay, what are my assumptions about how people behave? What are their motivations? And start modeling things. What's really interesting about what Felix and Johannes have done is they actually did a simulation they made some assumptions about how people might behave. They made some assumptions about, okay, there's something called quality, an abstract, intangible concept, but quality posts are more likely to be upvoted, but it's also a function of, how often they're viewed and what rank on the page, and created a simulation. And I think that's actually a great potential approach.
Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, this is on something that was stated earlier. But I agree on multiple metrics, and primarily I think what hasn't really been discussed and being very clear on what you are rating is, for me, the key point. One of the problems with current social media is like up and down votes are just a popularity concept of whatever reason. It's meaningless. Whereas I believe in truly only providing descriptive statistics and providing the transparency of like the reader of whatever is being scored or rated makes up their mind. That's why for me, expressing belief or agreement is so relevant, because you can easily show, well, 50 people believe this is true, 10 people believe it's not true. You make up your mind. It doesn't mean it's true or false. It just means that 50 people believe it's true and believe it's not true. That's already entirely different than what we have on social media right now. It doesn't mean 50 people upvoted this. It literally, if you literally say, if you make the action of like upvoting, you say, this means I believe in this, that's a world of change. And for every scoring mechanism, it should all be about having a clear indication of what you're actually doing, and then the statistics will become more meaningful. That's what I want to say.
Full agreement on that, that we need much clearer, what does this vote mean? Does this mean I believe it? Does it mean I believe it's an interesting argument, but I may or may not believe it? Or, these are both valuable to know and very, very different. And I think I made a point in the chat about this needs to use this process we're doing now in this room. We need to eventually involve more collective intelligence. I mean, we're doing it between us, which is great. But at some point, I think there has to be a community mechanism whereby the community gets to discuss this and rethink this. And is this working? Do the metrics we have serve the goals of the community? But anyway, that's all another question. But to go back to my reaction to what Tim was saying, on the one hand, I totally see the value of doing what you're describing about declaring a winner can be counterproductive because it creates an incentive for gaming. But on the other hand, I think one of the forms of attacks now is backing up assertions with fake facts and spamming the noosphere with assertions baked with fake facts. And I think being able to fight against this is, for me, a design goal. Not by excluding those facts, but by having a clear signal. This is, okay, you believe this is this fact, but this is this is what somebody who was there has to say, and here's the evidence. I was just recently in another conference, and there's a project, Starling Lab. I totally encourage you to see that. It was in the distributed web community. They're trying to make it very easy for journalists to take a picture and kind of putting in the DWeb, kind of notarize, I took this picture at this point, and it's now guaranteed by the distributed web that this was taken at this point in time and wasn't added later or predated or manipulated in those ways. And I think being able to say, well, here is why this is more believable than that, and which is a way of deciding truth. I think it is kind of important as a mechanism. Now, there'll be reactions to that, but I'd like to bring a totally different subject up to a point, but maybe we should finish the round of this.
Well, I mean, we can talk about this in the other canonical debate discussions, but like, I still think that's not just choosing a winner. But there's the question of, and the other reason for not choosing a winner is not related to quality. It's related to avoiding bifurcation, avoiding forking, right? You choose a win. You start declaring who's a winner. You start getting people who are like, this, you're being unfair to me. I'm going to take this somewhere else, right?
Yeah. And my solution to that is making forking not a problem. Yes. Yep. Whole discussion.
Yeah, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Nope.
But
add to the conversation too when I get a chance.
Okay. The other sentence I was going to say is like deciding what is spam and what isn't. I think in the question of a user that keeps adding, we've talked about this before, a user that just keeps adding fake news, fake, facts or whatever to support their argument, is something we could work out in terms of, there are people who will want to do that to help the community because they're collecting the fake news and putting it in there so it can be debunked once and for all, right? And then you got the person who's doing it intentionally to confuse things or try to prove their point. And the question is it useful or not? I think the answer to whether or not it's useful is whether or not that discussion is already happening outside in the community. Are they just creating it here inside the system quickly? So there are measures like how quickly they're creating it and whether or not, you know, there are links outside. You know, there's ways to game that, but it's more overhead, and that more overhead is a spam deterrent. So anyway, that's it. I guess, Carl, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks. I just want to try and get in two ideas, which is one is that we talk about, you know, declaring a winner. We can still be open to the concept of declaring winners, you know, like identifying here are the sort of leading, you know, viewpoints, or the, you know, this viewpoint wins in this sub community sort of concept. So, I mean, I would agree that, you know, a system that tries to always find one winner is really asking for trouble in many of the ways you've already described, but it could be valuable to have concepts of like this you know, claim is very popular in this community. And I think there can be a lot of value then to sort of trying to summarize or group or cluster users. The other thing I was going to say is that instead of, well, I shouldn't say instead, but and one of the things I did with Howju is instead of people, well, there goes instead again, instead of voting for I believe this or I don't, and I'm not necessarily arguing against that, but I had people vote on whether this justification to me proves this claim, to try and shift the focus from just a popularity contest or just your current beliefs, although I think it's really important to try and discover what those beliefs are, but to shift it towards why do you believe that? What are the reasons you find that? I think that also helps encourage people to say, well, okay, well, I see this thing I want to agree with. Well, you know, how do I upvote it? Oh, I have to figure out why I believe it and say that. And that might discourage some people. That may be a little bit overhead, but I think that's okay. But I think it then also help people then generate content saying, okay, the reason I believe this is, you know, this article I read or this, you know, paper I saw. Those are the two things I wanted to say. Am I still here? Okay, good. Mark's frozen, but no one else is.
I also see.
Billy had his hand up. I don't know. Sorry, Jonathan.
Oh,
I don't know if we're following the hand raising thing, but I find it like to be an easier way than trying to talk over other people.
Yeah, I like it.
who's it?
Just to mention that the canonical debate lab itself won't pick winners, but I think there's room for the scoring systems built on top of it to, you know, evaluate arguments. So I don't know, Tim, if that's still antithetical, but
there will be scores, right? Yes, there will be scores. That scoring is exactly picking a quote unquote winner, right?
yeah.
So yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah, so we don't need to definitive it. It's just Tim doesn't want that to be part of the core CDL system.
I mean, I would even consider it core. But what I would want to be core is there's no like setting in stone this is a winner, and there's ways for you to see how your arguments win if you believe certain things, and there's ways to see how other people believe a different thing. So it's like you know, it's like you were saying many winners as opposed to one winner, that type of thing. Yeah, that's core.
And not permanent winners, which Reason Score or Gullybot doesn't. So yeah.
So it sounds like we might have a unanimous agreement on the idea that there's not a one winner, but there could be many winners based on some sort of criteria.
Multiple criteria. I think multiple metrics. That I think is something we kind of all believe. The value of having multiple metrics, harder to game. Though Johannes was skeptical. Well, harder I think is not in doubt, not impossible. I would agree, Johannes. But I'm really curious to read what Jonathan was bringing about ungameable strategies. That's curious. Something I'm thinking hard about in a totally different context. Oh, sorry, Stephen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, it's a very short note about winning multiple winners. To go back to the descriptive statistics that I mentioned, an easy way to calculate multiple winners is you're looking for consensus. So if 2,000 people have voted, and there's 1,000 of those that all believe in that for the same reason, like there's 1,000 people that believe in a certain claim for all the same underlying arguments, you could say, well, that's pretty much a community of people that all believe in something for the same reason. You could declare the winner because there's some sort of consensus and reasoning behind that. That's it.
The question of what you've engaged with is extremely important. Like when you say, I vote for this, well, because you haven't looked at the counter arguments. I don't care about your vote. And so having a record of what people have engaged with and whether they've looked seriously at the counter arguments, and what is seriously, right? Is the person speed reading, which could be valid, or is the person really skimming and not paying attention? We don't know. But the recording reading, I think, I'm talking to a lot of people in a totally different era, and that's what I wanted to bring, is people who are looking at how do we measure the contribution of people to an ideas common as a way to allow people to make a living contributing beyond the notion of copyright and rigid intellectual property, but saying, oh, I've used some of this, I've improved it in this way, that's a contribution. So, but it's still using these other things. So that's still part of what I've had input. So if there's a financial reward, it has to be distributed between me and the people whose ideas I've used, which, and I don't own the idea because other people should be able to build on it, but in a way that I still get a benefit if they've built on it and stuff like that. And tracking reading and attention become extremely important. And that's difficult because the attention economy has given a lot of people reasons to not want to be tracked, and legitimately so. Whereas I think there's such a positive benefit to knowing, and even for me, like I want to know where my ideas came from because I might have forgotten, and having a history of what I've read and what might have influenced my thought is useful to me. So a kind of attention tracking of my own for my own attention would be useful. And I do think about the whole legal aspects, like I spoke about intellectual property, but on the other hand, many Europeans hear how much should I track given the GDPR constraints, right? And I'm working with immutable flows of events. Oops, what do I do with right to forget in an immutable event, in an immutable event stream? And these are hard questions, technically, but also legally. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that in. But the question, what I'm trying to say is, it's also relevant to our conversation about what does a vote mean in terms of how much you've engaged with all the other reasons. Over.
So there's lots of rabbit holes there that you've introduced, but one of them is that's a perfect example of multiple scoring algorithm, because one would be the simple popular vote, right, where it's who believes what. A second version of that would be a metric that weights those votes based on attention metrics, right? A third one might be based on areas of expertise, which is controversial how we want to track that and that sort of thing. But it could be so that might be three opposing metrics for just the popular vote, is weighting the votes based on certain characteristics. Right, so that right there is an example of how we would want to have different pluggable things. But you're right, in that case, it would be essential to track attention, right? But it's gameable, right? So another rabbit hole is something I've been thinking about, which is how would the existence of such a thing like the canonical debate affect actually the way people work. Okay, there are people who maybe could get paid somehow contributing to the common knowledge base, right? That's one approach. And if we have a reasonable solution for the right incentives and right measures and that sort of thing, we could pay people for making good contributions and cut off people or even charging them for wasting a time with spam. But there's also, how do scientists and academics work in a situation in which facts, claims take a life of their own and require expertise to contribute information down at the base? If you're adding information to the whole point of getting a doctorate and doing academic work is to contribute, to push the boundaries of human knowledge, right? And so we want to encourage people to keep being able to do this and making a living. And we talk about, the incentives right now are, I actually had a talk with a quantum physicist friend of mine about this, is, trying to get his feedback on how canonical debate would impact that sort of thing, or at least how academics work right now, which is they're incentivized to write lots of papers. The incentives in terms of good quality work is weaker than the incentive for quantity a lot of cases. Not entirely. You want to get published in the good review journals and that sort of thing, but there's a lot of politicking and a lot of other stuff that goes on, right? And the question is, what is, instead of the unit of measure for your contributions, instead of being a study or an academic paper or some bigger unit of work, instead being contributing one piece of new information or evidence to existing claims. In my opinion, that would be much more efficient. How would they work under that situation? They'd want to be tracked for sure, the fact that they're contributing useful new evidence, right? But it would change the structure of how they're contributing. Just something to reflect on there, I guess. I'll just throw it out.
I think that's a great higher level vision, a system that replaces the current academic publishing system, which has some really bad equilibriums, these signaling equilibriums centered around publication in reputable journals, and replaces it with a reputation score or some sort of metric that comes out of a social platform that we're building.
There's somebody who's commenting down in the chat want to talk?
I raised GDPR, and Stephen is bringing points.
I don't think GDPR is an issue. It's a tangent. It wasn't the focus of the conversation. So
no, I agree.
But I really don't think GDPR is an issue.
I think it is. Okay, I'll tell you why I think it's an issue. I'm dealing with mixed systems of where you have both structured conversation and informal chat. In informal chat, people are having a conversation. I know Tim often tells me, oh, you're speaking about conversations again. Well, for me, conversations are part, even like when you're discussing the curation, you might have a chat. And then you start mentioning people and naming people. So if I keep that, I'm keeping something that has names. And even if I put, for example, the PEI in a separate bucket than the events, so events have an opaque user ID, and then that user ID is not correlated to the PEI bucket, and I can erase the PEI bucket without losing the user ID and the user ID contributions, which should be good enough.
Just a quick response to that. Like if we had an elite cast, if we had an elite cast, first of all, users should be tracked, right? And I want a one user per human being solution if possible. But usernames should be revealed if they're given some sort of elite curator position. With greater power comes greater responsibility, that sort of thing. I would want that to be visible. But yeah,
I think, yeah, exactly. But it should be there. I agree with you. I think using aliases is extremely important for that reason. And yes, okay, and fair enough. And I think I should also not let's try to keep within the hour. But yeah, the
I should wrap up too.
Yeah, me too. I have to run, but I really loved the discussion today. I think that was
yes,
really
I think
productive.
it was a very good conversation, and this is as good a stopping point as any anyway.
I think we also have a lot of jumping off points for next time.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot
Thank
of
you all.
points to tackle. All right.
I think
See you
so.
next time.
Yeah, nice
Next
talking to you. See you.
Same. Goodbye.